Introduction. We all know that immersion is a tried and true way to learn a foreign language. After all, it's how we got so good at our first language. The problem is that it's extremely difficult to recreate the same circumstances when we learn a foreign language. We come to rely so much on our native language for everything, and it's hard to make enough time to learn a new one. We aren't surrounded by the foreign language in our home countries. More often than not, our families can't speak this new language we want to learn, and many of us have stressful jobs or demanding classes that eat away at our limited energy and hours of the day. Immersion can seem like an impossibility. What we can do, however, is gradually work our way up to immersion no matter where we are in life. And the way we can do this is through extensive reading and listening. If you have ever taken a foreign language class, chances are you are familiar with intensive reading and listening. In intensive reading and listening, a small amount of text or a short audio recording is broken down line by line, and then you are drilled on grammar endlessly. Extensive reading and listening, on the other hand, is quite the opposite. You read a large number of pages or listen to hours and hours of the foreign language without worrying about understanding everything. You rely on context for meaning and try to limit the number of words you need to look up. If you ask the most successful language learners, it's not intensive but extensive reading and listening that delivers the best results. Simply, volume is much more effective than explicit explanations and rote memorization. To be able to listen like this comfortably, you must practice listening in the foreign language for hours every single day. It takes a massive volume of words before your brain stops intensively listening and shifts into extensive listening. This book hopes to provide a few short stories in English you can use to practice extensive listening. These stories were written and edited by native English speakers from the United States. We hope these short stories help build confidence in your overall listening comprehension skills and encourage you to listen to more native material. They offer supplementary listening practice with a heavy focus on teaching vocabulary words. Vocabulary is the number one barrier to entry to extensive listening. Without an active vocabulary base of 10,000 words or more, you'll be stuck constantly looking up words in the dictionary, which will be sure to slow down your listening early on. To speed up the rate at which you understand, building and maintaining a vast vocabulary range is absolutely vital. This is why it's so important to invest as much time as possible into immersing yourself in native English every single day. This includes both reading and listening, as well as being around native speakers through any and all means possible. We hope you enjoy the book and find it useful in growing your English vocabulary and bringing you a few steps closer to extensive listening and fluency. How to use this book. To simulate extensive listening better, we recommend keeping things simple and using the short stories in the following manner. Whenever you encounter a word you don't know, first try to guess its meaning using the surrounding context. If its meaning is still unclear, check the PDF for that chapter's vocabulary and grammar list for a very simplified definition. If the unknown word is not found there, a quick online dictionary search may be required. In our vocabulary lists, we have strived both to include as many potentially new words and phrases as possible, but also to keep each list as brief as possible. As a result, we left out a great deal of words that can be understood via context, as well as many basic words. In addition, it's also recommended to listen to each story silently. While repeating what you hear can seem beneficial for pronunciation and intonation, it's a practice more aligned with intensive listening. It will further slow down your progress and make it considerably more difficult for you to get into extensive listening. If you want to work on pronunciation and intonation, consider practicing these during study and review times rather than listening time. Alternatively, you could also speak to an English tutor or friend to practice what you learned. After completing the story for each chapter, test your knowledge by answering the comprehension questions. As a means of review, memorization of any kind is completely unnecessary for language acquisition. The actual language acquisition process occurs subconsciously, and any effort to memorize new vocabulary and grammar structures only stores this information in your short-term memory. Attempting to force new information into your long-term memory only serves to eat up your time and make it that much more frustrating when you can't recall it in the future. If you wish to review new information that you have learned from the short stories, there are several options that would be wiser. Spaced repetition systems, or SRS, allow you to cut down on your review time by setting specific intervals in which you are tested on information in order to promote long-term memory storage. Anki and the Gold List method are two popular SRS choices that give you the ability to review whatever information you'd like from whatever material you'd like. Trying to actively review every single new thing you learn, however, will slow you down on your overall path to fluency. While there may be hundreds or even thousands of sentences you want to practice and review, perhaps the best way to go about internalizing it all is to forget it. If it's that important, it will come up through more reading and listening to more English. Languages are more effectively acquired when we allow ourselves to read and listen to them naturally. And with that, it is time to get started with the 8 stories presented in this volume. Good luck to you, listener. Chapter 1. 50 Days and 50 Nights. David was a mess. Going through a divorce meant the end of a life he spent 20 years building. His emotions were drained of all life, and there was no energy or desire to do anything. Instead, there was only pain. A force that could not be seen ate away at him at every hour of every day. A feeling of hopelessness was consuming him slowly, and one day there would be nothing left of him. Fear was the only thing that moved David out of bed and to work each morning. It was a fear of things becoming worse than they already were, and they could always get worse. He could get fired, become poor, lose his home, or even get addicted to drugs. Any of those could be the last straw. There were only 2 comforts left in the world: food and sleep. While sleep completely numbed the pain, food only provided a short distraction. Corn chips, lasagna, cookies, pizza, and greasy burgers and fries were the go-tos. The sugars, fats, and salts flooded the pleasure centers of his brain, while his soul felt no such thing. David would eat and eat until he could eat no more, and then he would return right back to the despair he was in before. And each time, the despair would be coupled with disgust of himself. There was nothing he could do but suffer. When sleep finally did come, it was a mercy. Since the start of the separation with his ex-wife, David's weight had jumped from 190 to 260 pounds. He knew he was in bad health. He could feel it. He would die of heart failure or of something soon. This he knew. And then one day, David came across a story and a community he would never imagine to be real. Through social media, he learned that a group of dedicated individuals online were doing fasts lasting from 24 hours to 30 days or more. The story was told in a post by a man who completely transformed his life by completing a 40-day fast. At first, David was alarmed, but he soon saw that it was all done under medical supervision. It was like something straight out of the Bible, but achieved by a normal human. And in his post, there were tips for anyone who wanted to accomplish the same. David was more than sold. He would try a water fast and go for as long as he could. He would drink only liquids that contained no calories and eat no food. The thought alone of eating disgusted him, so he had plenty of motivation to get started. The first morning without breakfast felt strange, but there was no turning back now. Besides, David could still have his morning coffee, and that first cup was often the highlight of his day. This time, though, he had to drink it black, which he was not used to. After his first sip, he immediately missed the milky and sugary flavors he was so used to. But at the same time, this sacrifice had meaning. Learning to go without meant everything to him. Lunch and dinner were equally strange. David was so used to eating during these times that it was hard to do something different. But he realized something. He wasn't actually hungry. He had more than plenty of food the day before, so he just needed to find something to focus on and bide his time. New coping mechanisms were required. Walking and drinking water became David's new best friends. Anytime he felt the urge to eat, he would walk it off. He also sipped on water constantly. The best part was that he didn't have to work out to lose weight. The fasting and walking did the heavy lifting for him. Having an appetite, but being unable to eat was annoying. But eventually, it would go away. It never lasted. Cravings came and went. If he could just be with those feelings for long enough without giving in to them, they would pass. Day 3 was a challenge. There was a stress that slowly built up throughout the day after not eating for so long. By dinner time, it became unbearable. David had previously stowed away a bag of chips deep in his pantry behind healthier choices. It was an effort to forget they ever existed. But in this moment, he remembered exactly where they were and went to retrieve them. He was near determined to break the fast. Out of desperation, he focused on the stress he was currently feeling. He asked himself if this was worse than the past year of hell he had gone through. He had already suffered so much, to many points he did not think he could live through. This one moment of stress was nothing compared to any of that. If he could somehow go through that and live, he could somehow be with this level of stress. And so he set his temptation aside and lay down on his couch. He tossed, he turned, he suffered, but he did so with purpose. He was unsure if the hunger pangs would go away. Yet, by the time night had come, the hunger had passed, and he was shocked. After that day, all of his hunger ceased to exist, and the fast became significantly easier. A week passed, and then another week passed. Of course, David kept well hydrated. He drank plenty of electrolyte drinks to maintain good energy levels. He also saw his doctor each week to monitor his health and make sure everything was okay. A month into the fast, David was astounded. How could someone still have energy despite having no food whatsoever? His body still had so much energy to burn due to his size. If he could go this long without food, it made him rethink the reason why he ate. It must have been boredom and the desire to not sit there and be with that boredom, he figured. Soon after, day 50 had come. There was no specific number of days he aimed for, however. David's original goal was simply to fast for as long as he possibly could. With all the improvements in his health and energy he had seen these past 50 days, he certainly could continue. He thought he could even run a mile or two with how good he felt. Realizing he had achieved what he really wanted out of all of this, David decided to finally break his fast, but very slowly and carefully. His doctor had warned him that eating too many calories too quickly after a prolonged fast could cause him to die. This is because of the rapid change in electrolyte levels that would occur. It causes very serious health complications. This process is called refeeding syndrome. At the doctor's office, his electrolyte levels were checked with a blood test. He was advised to only consume a small amount of calories each day for the next week. Easily digestible fruits like watermelon and apples were to be his first few meals. Citrus fruits were to be avoided at all costs. He was also recommended to take a vitamin supplement. If all went well after the first few meals, he could start eating vegetables like sauerkraut. So on the morning of day 51, David sliced up a watermelon and grabbed a fork, ready to eat. He carefully hand-picked his first piece of food after 50 days. He then brought the chunk of melon close to his lips. Opening his mouth, he leaned in to take a bite, but he stopped himself and smiled out of nervousness. Trying again only got him the same result. It was as if he had forgotten how to eat. He counted down from 3. On 0, he plunged the fruit into his mouth and started chewing. It was like recovering a lost memory from years past. Once again, he remembered what it was like to taste something incredibly sweet, and it was pure joy. One thing was clear now. Food was a gift. Food was something to be enjoyed. It was not a prison, and he was not its prisoner. It was all as if David had been given a second chance at life, and so he was ready to continue living. This time, he carried not only a lot less weight, but all the experience and wisdom of the past. 50 days and 50 nights, comprehension questions. 1. Why was David's life falling apart? A. He was going through a breakup with his ex-girlfriend. B. He was going through a divorce. The correct answer is B. He was going through a divorce. 2. How did food and sleep help David cope with his feelings? A. Food was an abstraction and sleep softened the pain. B. Food was a distraction and sleep numbed the pain. The correct answer is B. Food was a distraction and sleep numbed the pain. 3. If something was done under medical supervision, it means A. It was done while a doctor monitored the situation. B. It was done while a doctor advised you on the complications. The correct answer is A. It was done while a doctor monitored the situation. 4. Where did David's motivation to start fasting come from? A. He was disgusted just by the thought of eating. B. He was disgusted by thoughts that were eating at him. The correct answer is A. He was disgusted just by the thought of eating. 5. What sacrifice did David make in the morning? A. Learning to go without breakfast. B. Drinking coffee with cream and sugar. The correct answer is B. Drinking coffee with cream and sugar. 6. Which were not new coping mechanisms David learned? A. Doing heavy lifting while fasting and walking. B. Sipping water and going for walks. The correct answer is A. Doing heavy lifting while fasting and walking. 7. What happened on the third day? A. David battled the temptation to eat due to rising stress. B. David's stress had built up, so he snacked on a bag of chips. The correct answer is A. David battled the temptation to eat due to rising stress. 8. How did David have so much energy despite eating no food? A. He had a doctor monitor his health. B. He drank lots of electrolytes and also because of his size. The correct answer is B. He drank lots of electrolytes and also because of his size. 9. Why did David decide to break the fast? A. He accomplished what he really wanted from fasting. B. Eating too many calories after a long fast could kill him. The correct answer is A. He accomplished what he really wanted from fasting. 10. Why should you eat small meals after a prolonged fast? A. You have to take a vitamin supplement first. B. You can die from complications from refeeding syndrome. The correct answer is B. You can die from complications from refeeding syndrome. Chapter 2. For All the Wrong Reasons. Ever since she was a teenager, Amy knew she was destined to be a writer. Even as a child, there was this magnetic attraction that drew her into the world of books. She devoured story after story. Her parents had no trouble buying her more for her reading habit. It was an easy investment that was relatively cheap, and it would most definitely pay off in the near future. Amy's growing desire to write, however, would go unrecognized. Her parents saw her obsession with reading fiction as a sign of high intellect, so they made a team effort to push her into focusing her time and effort into school. Soon, there wasn't as much time for Amy to read her newest novels because she had piano and math classes to attend after school. Amy had no objection to these extra classes. She was told by her mother and father that she was incredibly gifted with talents that not many other kids had, and it would be a shame to let all her natural abilities waste away when they could be used for good. When Amy entered high school, the pressure began to escalate further. She was expected to make straight A's every semester. To make sure she was performing at her best, her mother would quiz her every day on what she learned. Amy would also have to explain what she was learning in all her classes. When she couldn't recall important details, her mother would always smile and crack a joke. She was never straight up mean with her daughter. Her intentions were cleverly disguised with love and a silly character. Amy knew, however, that it was her mother's indirect way of letting her know what she needed to study that night. She would be quizzed later that night to make sure she absolutely knew the information by the next day. All the extra schooling and study sessions did not leave Amy with much time for a social life. When she did have an hour or two to herself, she would rather pick up where she left off in the last book she was reading. Her father rewarded her with a few new novels with every report card she brought to him, and it would always be straight A's. She never disappointed her parents' expectations. Those few spare moments when she was reading seemed to pass by far too quickly. Pages would fly as she raced against the clock to make as much progress as she could. There never seemed to be enough time, however. For the hours she was reading, time did not exist. Amy would be immersed in worlds authors created. Its characters had new levels of complexity with every chapter she read. There was something about how people presented themselves. Sometimes their actions did not align with their public image. Authors could also reveal actions that were hidden from other characters. If done well enough, she would start to care about what happens to certain people in the story. This process completely fascinated Amy. College would prove to push her away from her obsession. The freedom that came with living far away from home was certainly welcome, though. How she spent her time was her decision, and hers alone. On campus and in the dorm rooms, Amy finally had the chance to socialize with other students. From party animals to young geniuses, there were all kinds of people she had the opportunity to meet. This included entrepreneurs who had big ideas to make big companies. Also included were athletes who had strength and ability she did not even know were possible. And of course, a large percentage of students she met were in the same boat as her. They were floating around, trying to find their place in society. Amy dreamed of becoming a famous writer, but it was a dream with many risks attached. Not many writers made it big, after all. Many who pursued the dream couldn't land a deal with a major publisher. She heard hundreds of stories from writers who spent years writing novels only to be turned down by everybody. These writers ended up working dead-end jobs just to pay the bills. In this way, their dreams had led them into poverty and depression. She certainly did not want to be stuck with a depressingly low-paying job and a book that no one wanted to read. What an awful fate that would be. And so she decided to throw all her energy into starting a more stable career. It would have to be a career where she could write every day, and immediately the idea of becoming a journalist seemed to be the most feasible. She knew she had the academic ability to study the trade and learn how to write news articles professionally. Her intuition proved to be right. The classes were no challenge for her, and she had the discipline to pursue the right internship she needed. By the time she had graduated with her degree in journalism, Amy already had a job. She worked at a major corporation as an editor and columnist. Her transition into work life was smooth, and her parents were very proud of what she had achieved. The hours were long, and the work was highly demanding. Editing news articles required careful thinking and tough decisions. Research was required as well, and time-consuming overall. The volume of articles needing editing was extremely high, and Amy had to work fast to be able to get to all of them. When it came to writing news stories, however, there was this immediate sinking feeling in her gut. The format given to her had a high number of restrictions. The corporation required information to be presented in such a way, and there was no room for her own ideas. It was simply researching certain facts and reporting them. Essentially, it was grunt work. To be able to write her own style, she would have to be promoted to a senior columnist, and that could take up to 10 years to accomplish, she learned. The idea of doing this constricted style of writing for that long sickened her. Over time, these thoughts slowly turned into a growing anxiety. It made life miserable for Amy. As a result, she began to resort to alcohol to ease her pain. The thought of having to wait 10 years to gain the freedom to write the way she wanted was just unbearable. She would be stuck grinding away at a job that worked her to the bone. On weekdays, Amy would come home so tired that she didn't want to do anything. All she wanted was to have a glass of wine and watch TV until it was time for bed. And on weekends, she would be too depressed to go out and do anything. After back-to-back months of unproductive weekends, she went back to reading novels. Although this time, it wasn't the same. That childlike fascination she once had was no longer there. There was this awful feeling in the back of her mind that made it quite difficult to focus on the story. It was heartbreaking to start to lose interest in something she was absolutely mesmerized by as a kid. Why couldn't she go back to simpler times, when she could spend hours reading novels while dreaming about her own characters? Amy decided long ago that it was much too risky for her to start writing a novel. She knew the slim chances of it becoming successful. But now, the idea was becoming more exciting than it had ever been. The small possibility of it becoming a bestseller brought out strong feelings of joy she hadn't felt in quite some time. And even if the novel wasn't highly successful, she at least had to try. If she didn't, she knew that she would be miserable and eventually bitter as she got older. Working as a corporate journalist was draining all the strength and vitality she needed to pour into her passion. The truth was clear. She would have to quit her high-paying job to free herself completely. The novel she always wanted to write would take forever to complete if she was just writing on the weekends. and even then, she would be writing while still exhausted from being overworked during the week. The writing would have to be done every day. And so, Amy quit her lucrative journalist position. She then found part-time work as a freelance editor. It was a severe pay cut, but it was well worth having the time and energy to work every day on her dream. It's difficult to say if she will secure a publishing deal or not. At this point, however, it no longer matters to Amy. Peace of mind is the only guarantee. For all the wrong reasons. Comprehension questions. 1. Amy's parents saw their child's obsession with reading as A. A sign of creativity, B. A sign of high intellect. The correct answer is B. A sign of high intellect. 2. What kind of pressure did Amy face while in high school? A. She was expected to read novels given to her by her father. B. She was expected to get the highest grades every semester. The correct answer is B. She was expected to get the highest grades every semester. 3. How did Amy's mom disguise her intentions? A. With love and a silly character. B. With cleverness and a stupid voice. The correct answer is A. With love and a silly character. 4. What was it about reading fiction that attracted Amy? A. Characters' actions didn't always match their public image. B. There was something about the alignment of actions. The correct answer is A. Characters' actions didn't always match their public image. 5. What kind of people did Amy meet in college? A. Party animals, geniuses, entrepreneurs, and athletes. B. Party animals, students, boats, and floaters. The correct answer is A. Party animals, geniuses, entrepreneurs, and athletes. 6. According to the story, why do most writers fail to find success? A. They cannot get out of poverty and depression. B. They cannot get a deal with a major publisher. The correct answer is B. They cannot get a deal with a major publisher. 7. What were working conditions like for Amy at the corporation? A. It was a tough job that required research and volume. B. It was a demanding job with a high volume of work. The correct answer is B. It was a demanding job with a high volume of work. 8. Why didn't Amy like writing as a journalist for the corporation? A. The work became too political. B. There were too many restrictions imposed on her writing. The correct answer is B. There were too many restrictions imposed on her writing. 9. Amy would become miserable and bitter if she didn't do what? A. Stay young. B. Try to write a best-selling novel. The correct answer is B. Try to write a best-selling novel. 10. Why did Amy quit her job as a corporate journalist? A. She found a better-paying job as a freelancer. B. She needed the time to focus on writing her novel. The correct answer is B. She needed the time to focus on writing her novel. Chapter 3. The Lesser of Two Evils. The American presidential election season was underway. Only one could be the next commander-in-chief. Many politicians had campaigned over the last 2 years, trying to gather enough support. But the competition was too strong for the vast majority, and for good reason. After all, they were competing to become the leader of the free world. For one reason or another, voters did not join their cause. Some had excellent policy ideas that were smart and practical, but their personalities were weak. Their words were carefully rehearsed and didn't sound authentic at all. If someone was going to become president, they would have to seem genuine at heart. Yet most sounded like any other politician. They made the same promises voters have heard hundreds of times in the past. If they were elected, they would create jobs, work hard for the middle class, and invest in education. It was the same old rhetoric heard again and again, and the people were sick of it. Other candidates stood out a little too much. Scandals are a part of every election cycle, and just one could doom any politician's career. Sex scandals, in particular, were a political death sentence. News of affairs was common, but sometimes the details got quite disturbing. This year, one candidate was caught on camera inappropriately touching underage girls at a public event. The news media quickly learned of the event. Soon, news stories speculating that the man was a pedophile were on TV all day and night. From that point, it was only a matter of time until he dropped out. Even if candidates seemed like they were good people, ones who were mentally slow were humiliated and then eliminated as well. A candidate could be very well spoken 99% of the time, but sometimes all it takes is just one mistake to end someone's campaign. Everything said in front of a camera can be shared and played back infinitely. This can be used to destroy someone's reputation, even one built across decades. Some of these mistakes can be forgiven, yet there is one that cannot, and that is corruption. But unfortunately, it's very hard to prove how corrupt any politician is. This is because so much takes place behind closed doors in Washington. Who knows what kind of shady deals are made during secret meetings with the rich and powerful? When politicians need to raise more money than their competitors to win elections, sacrifices must be made. Here is when the slippery slope begins. How many morals is someone willing to sacrifice to win the race? How many lobbyists will they meet and take money from in exchange for political favors? How many of these political favors will hurt the public, and how much will they hurt? Because corporations and billionaires invest millions of dollars into candidates, it's difficult to say where a politician's true loyalties lie. They may become fully compromised. They may even reach a state where every public statement they make is completely controlled. At that point, they are essentially bought and paid for. They are puppets. The result of this system are politicians that seem fake and not at all authentic. They study, research and train themselves to be a public image that appeals to the most amount of people. But voters see right through it. Some, however, are better actors. In the end, every race almost always comes down to two candidates, one from each major political party. The two-party system makes sure of this. But what kind of people are actually able to secure these two spots? Surely they would be the most appealing and charming choices. But sadly, no, at least not in recent years. Many popular candidates fail to gather enough money and support to stay in the race. Other times, one party would pour all of its resources into one candidate and quickly annihilate all other candidates in the party. And so the country must often choose between two corrupt and compromised individuals. This is true for the presidential, but also congressional and local elections. Of course, it is the presidential election that receives the most attention. So what two choices have Americans been given for president this year? First, there is the Liberal candidate Robert Hamilton. His lovable personality and charming behavior makes it easy to understand the appeal he has with many voters. He's incredibly nice to every reporter, politician, and citizen he comes across. Upon further inspection, however, it's obvious his policies are very vague with no real meaning behind them. Look at any time Hamilton is thoroughly questioned about his economic policies, for example. There comes a point where he will crack a joke and quickly change topics. His charm, great timing, and quick wit make it work so well. He has mastered the art of giving an answer that sounds nice, but doesn't answer the question at all. And second, the Conservative candidate Geoffrey Copperfield is not all that much better. He's a master salesman who knows how to sell people on an idea. His team has created simple yet powerful campaign slogans that promise real change. It's difficult to say how well he will deliver on his revolutionary ideas if he's elected. Unfortunately, Copperfield has a reputation for having a big mouth and also lying. When questioned about his past statements by reporters, he responds with a verbal attack. He's ruthless with his insults, and he doesn't hold back. His aim is to destroy their credibility as sources of news. It's part of his strategy to get people to question the integrity of the liberal media. That way, they will vote anti-liberal. Given his popularity, it has been most definitely effective. Now the media appears to be mainly focusing on just attacking him, rather than doing their job of delivering the news. This has swayed more voters to his side. Hamilton and Copperfield are now neck and neck in the polls. Regardless of who wins, it seems the country loses either way. Corporations and billionaires will win, but the people will lose. With choices like these, it makes sense why some people don't vote at all. Damned if they do, damned if they don't. Throughout history, when a political system becomes corrupted and broken, the people rise up and start a revolution. Starvation and injustice are the usual starting points. But what happens when the people are given unlimited food and entertainment for a very cheap price like in America today? How long can people bury their problems before something has to change? What will be the final straw? The lesser of two evils, comprehension questions. 1. Presidential candidates are not competing to become A. the lesser of two evils, B. the commander-in-chief. The correct answer is A. the lesser of two evils. 2. The story mentions that voters were tired of hearing what? A. the sound of debating politicians, B. The same old promises from politicians. The correct answer is B. The same old promises from politicians. 3. What actual scandal was caught on camera? A. A candidate awkwardly touching teenage girls. B. The dooming and death sentencing of a politician's career. The correct answer is A. A candidate awkwardly touching teenage girls. 4. What is the one mistake that cannot be forgiven in the story? A. Corruption. B. Scandals. The correct answer is A. Corruption. 5. What does it mean if a politician is fully compromised? A. They buy and pay for lobbyists. B. They are loyal to the rich and powerful, but not the people. The correct answer is B. They are loyal to the rich and powerful, but not the people. 6. What does it mean if someone is fake? A. They are a politician. B. Their personality is not authentic. The correct answer is B. Their personality is not authentic. 7. If you have a charming and lovable personality, A. You are incredibly nice and people like you. B. You are very lucky and good things happen to you. The correct answer is A. You are incredibly nice and people like you. 8. Robert Hamilton does what when questioned about his policy? A. He cracks a joke and comes to a point. B. He changes the subject using charm and wit. The correct answer is B. He changes the subject using charm and wit. 9. What does Geoffrey Copperfield do when reporters question him about his past statements? A. He physically attacks and harms them. B. He verbally attacks and insults them. The correct answer is B. He verbally attacks and insults them. 10. According to the story, who is currently leading in the polls? A. It's a tie between Liberals and Conservatives. B. It's a tie between Hamilton and Copperfield. The correct answer is B. It's a tie between Hamilton and Copperfield. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Influencer. Michael had just earned his first $1 million. His friends and family were in disbelief. Just a few years ago, many of them were doubtful he was going to get anywhere with the business he had started. In their eyes, Michael had made a series of odd choices throughout his life, and this was just another of his crazy ideas. Now, however, his peers were calling him a genius. How else could he have had this much success? Only geniuses came up with ideas that make that much money. Although, if we examine Michael's life a little more closely, what made him rich will become more apparent. There were certain beliefs and mindsets he adopted that eventually grew into financial success. They were ideas and ways of thinking that anyone could use if they chose to focus on them. In other words, anyone could achieve what Michael had. Early in life, Michael started out with very few gifts. He was a mediocre student who didn't care much for school. He was the class clown and more interested in getting a laugh than getting a good grade. For years, teachers and counselors warned him. They told him that if he continued down this path, he was going to have to face the consequences of his actions. And of course, Michael didn't listen. They wanted him gone from their classrooms, so they gave him low but barely passing grades just so he would not have to repeat their classes. On his graduation day, it was almost as if all of his teachers gave him a sarcastic look. It was a look that said, "Congratulations, now get out." Michael spent the first years of his adult life jumping from job to job. He worked at retail stores, restaurants, factories, and even as a janitor. They all taught him how to work hard, deal with people, and act like an adult. Earning his own money and becoming independent from his parents was at first challenging, but eventually it became a liberating experience. In his early 20s, Michael was always able to find work, yet only for dead-end jobs. Living paycheck to paycheck, he was unable to save any money. He had no special talents to share with the world. His life was going nowhere, and it scared him deeply. Then one day, while he was working in sales, he had a thought. He wondered why some of his co-workers were making so much more than he was. They were in the office working for roughly the same amount of time he was, yet they were able to make thousands more in sales than him. What were they doing differently, he asked himself. These burning questions kept bothering him day after day. That was until he decided to ask the highest-earning salesman directly. The man said to him that there was a book out there that changed his life. If he wanted to make more sales, that book would definitely help him, he was told. He was intrigued by the idea that a book could change his life, so Michael bought a copy and began reading it immediately. While he was a poor student in school, he was not illiterate. Even reading at a slow pace, he was determined to power through the whole book. He was fascinated by the author's message of self-mastery. He even grabbed a pen and some paper and began to take notes while reading. The author told stories about some of the most successful people who ever lived and explained what made each of them so brilliant at their craft. These were stories about men and women who overcame obstacles that seemed impossible. But somehow and some way, they were able to break through. In each story, a person from history came across a very important lesson during their life. It would prove to be a lesson that completely altered the course of their lives. By the time Michael had finished the book, he was filled with determination and hope for the future. He realized that he was completely responsible for himself. If he wanted to change his life situation, he had to change his environment and everything he allowed inside his mind and body. This meant changing what time meant to him and how it should be spent. He had to change what media he watched, read, and listened to. He had to change his entertainment to something that empowered him with creativity. He even had to change what foods he ate to give him the necessary fuel to get more done each and every day. Time was his most valuable resource of all, he learned. Time spent watching TV and movies was giving Michael zero return on his investment. Entertainment that provided only short-term pleasure was no longer an acceptable use of his time. It was much wiser to invest it elsewhere. Soon, his mornings started with audiobooks instead of checking his smartphone. His afternoons were opportunities to learn new skills, like video editing and public speaking, and his evenings were spent relaxing, watching educational videos, and listening to informative podcasts. Everything he did was a step towards his goals. Michael also started investing money into himself. He stopped spending his paychecks on video games, alcohol, and eating out all the time. Instead, he bought several books on the art of selling. His mission was to figure out the best sales strategies he could immediately use. The goal was to quickly increase his revenue. And he succeeded. Within a year, he was able to triple the amount of products he sold to customers. As a result, he had tripled his own income. And things only continued to grow. After about a year of studying by himself, Michael had accumulated a lot of knowledge and a couple of new skills. But what would he do with what he had learned? He was quickly rising to the top of the sales team at his company, so he now started to feel he was capable of something far more ambitious. After many months of careful thinking, he decided to become a motivational speaker. The past year had proved to him how a message of encouragement could change someone's life. It certainly had changed his. His family had grown up poor, not just in terms of money, but thinking too. Whenever things did not go their way, his parents would complain. They blamed other people for their problems. Sometimes this included Michael. This was how they dealt with their anger and frustration. Work was something to suffer through in order to pay the bills and barely get by. Any extra money was spent on immediate pleasures, like eating out at restaurants or buying expensive clothing. No money was ever saved. It was this kind of thinking Michael had inherited from his mom and dad. But now he knew much better. He wanted to show the world how to think rich. Not everyone wants to be rich, of course, but he would teach how someone's way of thinking could make them poor or rich, both financially and mentally. The goal was to inspire people to do and achieve things they never thought they would be capable of. His message would be his own story. It will be the story of how he was once a nobody going nowhere with his life, and then somehow he turned it all around. It would be an example of how to go from being a broke D student in high school to being successful and in complete control of your life. It would be his zero to hero story. Michael would use his newly acquired video editing and public speaking skills to create content on social media. Unfortunately, it was slow to gain any real following in its first year. He, however, did not look for things to blame for the slow start. Instead, he made it his mission to figure out what he could do to grow his influence. He was committed to a life of constant learning, and succeeding at social media was another thing he would learn. To make his videos more appealing to viewers, he utilized the power of attractive titles and thumbnails. Sure, accurate titles and thumbnails properly describe videos, but they draw little to no attention. Good titles provoke people. They make bold statements. They make people think, well, now I have to find out if that's true or not. Content was the other essential component he needed to master. Videos of himself in his living room just talking into the camera weren't performing very well. He had to increase his production value. Michael began filming videos from multiple cameras and locations, and in the editing process, he combined his video footage with images and animation. With these improvements and his witty personality, he was able to make something incredible and inspirational. His second year on social media landed him enormous success. The newer videos resonated with what people were feeling. They were compelled to share them with their family, friends, and followers. Those people then shared the videos with their own family, friends, and followers, causing a cycle. As a result, many of his videos went viral. They were making thousands of dollars in ad revenue, and he was gaining hundreds of thousands of fans. Because of his popularity and skills as a public speaker, he was invited and paid to speak at large events. Here he gained even more money and fame. At these events, he also met a large number of other content creators, many of whom wanted to collaborate with him. By the end, he returned home with a long list of contacts who were not only super creative, but super friendly as well. His success continued to snowball. With his huge and still growing social media following, Michael launched his own line of merchandise. He sold mugs, shirts, and hoodies, all with his popular catchphrases on them. There were also many sponsorship deals he was offered, but he only accepted those for products he actually used. They were products he believed in, like health supplements and educational tools. And finally, he even did live streams where he took donations from fans and answered their questions. By his third year on social media, he realized he had more money than he would ever need in his life. Michael had become financially independent for the rest of his life. The former class clown with no future was now wealthy. His family and friends were dumbfounded. How could someone like that become rich? It had to have been luck. If not luck, it was because he had a natural talent for being funny. There was just no other way they could accept it. But Michael knew it was more than luck and talent that allowed him to reach this point. The greatest reward, however, was neither the wealth nor the fame, but the person he had become. If there was something he truly wanted, he would allow nothing to get between him and his goal. He had become the unstoppable force. With his power and wealth, he would not retire and live a life of luxury with fancy houses, clothes, and parties. No, that would be far too boring. Now was the time to find the next thing he would build. And this time, it would be bigger than himself. Comprehension questions. 1. In whose eyes did Michael's business ideas seem crazy? A. His eyes. B. His family and friends. The correct answer is B. His family and friends. 2. What kind of student was Michael at school? A. He was creative and sarcastic. B. He was mediocre and the class clown. The correct answer is B. He was mediocre and the class clown. 3. At which of the following places did Michael not work? A. Factories. B. Amusement parks. The correct answer is B. Amusement parks. 4. In the story, Michael has multiple burning questions at one point. Which of the following was one of them? A. Which book would change his life? B. What were the other salesmen doing differently than him? The correct answer is B. What were the other salesmen doing differently than him? 5. How did Michael feel after reading the book suggested to him? A. He was filled with anger and disgust. B. He became empowered and hopeful for the future. The correct answer is B. He became empowered and hopeful for the future. 6. How did Michael invest money into himself? A. He bought books about selling. B. He spent his paychecks on video games, alcohol, and food. The correct answer is A. He bought books about selling. 7. Acting as a clown during school helped Michael cope with what? A. His messages of encouragement. B. His parents' complaints and anger issues. The correct answer is B. His parents' complaints and anger issues. 8. What story did Michael tell in his videos? A. The story of a hero who turned into a zero. B. The story of a loser who turned his life around. The correct answer is B. The story of a loser who turned his life around. 9. How did Michael grow his YouTube channel? A. He improved his titles, thumbnails, and video content. B. He provoked people by using bold statements. The correct answer is A. He improved his titles, thumbnails, and video content. 10. How do influencers make their money? A. Through sponsorships, ad revenue, and merchandise. B. Through shirts, donations, and snowballs. The correct answer is A. Through sponsorships, ad revenue, and merchandise. Chapter 5. Big Fish. Rhonda was what you might call an overachiever. A very competitive spirit was at her core, and she was always on the hunt for more. It was a hunt to learn more, achieve more, do more, win more, and be more. In school, she was the big fish in the small pond. She was brought up to treat her classmates with respect and a friendly attitude. But when it was test time, they all became minnows to feed her insatiable desire to be the best. With relative ease, she graduated as the top of her class. Boys were drawn to her large emerald eyes and their powerful stare. Her look was hypnotic, and when she got older, her innocent face and subtle features could and did attract a long line of men ready to marry her if she wanted. But she did not desire the life of a simple housewife. She knew she could be more, so much more. At university, Rhonda met her match intellectually. There were folks raised from birth to become lawyers and doctors at her school. Try as she did, she would go neck and neck with some of the best brains in the country, until a certain point, that is. After chatting with her peers, she learned that some of them were putting in a fraction of the study time and effort she was, and they got higher scores than her. She couldn't believe it. Her heart sank. How could she compete with those who effortlessly did better than her best effort? Defeat was undeniable. Her interest in school vanished almost completely. There was no point in trying any more. Her energy had vanished too. She became depressed for a few weeks. Life had made sense until this point. Who was she at this point, she asked. She was a nobody, she answered. It was through sports that she found new life for her competitive spirit. Rhonda was neither the fastest nor one for teamwork, but she was willing to go to lengths that not many other girls would. And so she took up weightlifting. In a sport dominated by men, she definitely stood out from the crowd. Being a woman meant a slow start and a pitiful foundation for upper body strength. But over time, her advantages were revealed. With enough reps and sets, she learned her legs were quite strong. Having a diet full of good nutrition and lots of protein helped her legs grow. Learning about proper lifting and training techniques was also important. It allowed her to safely add increasing amounts of weight, reps, and intensity during workouts. The result was a cycle of her becoming stronger and stronger and lifting heavier and heavier loads, and all the extra muscle would go mostly to her lower body. This allowed her to maintain her cute upper frame. Going to the gym, lifting and getting stronger became her life. She could only make limited gains on the upper body lifts like the bench press, but Rhonda was breaking personal records for lower body lifts week after week. The progress was addicting. For years, she trained and pushed her body to its limits. Soon enough, she easily had the strongest squat and deadlift at her local gym, men included too. It was time to put her strength to the test. She entered a local powerlifting competition intending to go all out. The months of training leading up to the event were extremely challenging. These training sessions were some of the most sadistic workouts she had ever endured. But she went to bed each night sore, knowing she put in as much work as she possibly could. The day of the meet and competition had come, and it had gone. Rhonda was awarded first place after a serious battle with some tough competition in her weight class. She barely squeaked by with a victory against some of the strongest women out there. She even put up some respectable numbers compared to the men. But something happened that night deep inside Rhonda. The obvious move now was to go and seek larger competition. There she was supposed to train even harder. Her aspiration should be potentially competing in the Olympics or starting a business like a gym or a line of supplements. But suddenly she didn't want any of that. Rhonda didn't want or feel anything for that matter. She felt nothing, and it terrified her. For the first time in her life, the big fish had no hunger. The hunger for more had been the driving force of her life, and now she was without it and without life. A dark depression once again took hold of her, but this time it was different. It was self-destructive. She started drinking heavily just to remember what it was like to feel joy or even anything again. She drank so much that her body stopped craving food altogether. It only craved alcohol. Rhonda did not desire death, however. A year of time had allowed her to process the emptiness and despair she experienced. Perhaps she was not destined to be an all-star student, nor was she destined to be a world-class athlete. But it no longer mattered. For once, she was content with the idea of being normal. A realization had occurred in her mind. She saw that people are beings of infinite potential and imagination, but there is a limit to people's ability to care. At some point, things no longer matter. In the end, nothing really matters, and Rhonda was okay with that. It brought her peace. Slowly but surely, her drinking subsided and plans for a bright future returned. She was now on a quest to find fulfillment. This time, it would be in a more modest lifestyle. Why was she so competitive in the first place? If she could tap into that energy, she could use it to do or make something to help other people. The answers would not come easy. They would take time. They would take years. Maybe even one day that hunger would return once more. And if it did, she would be ready. Big Fish Comprehension Questions. 1. If someone has a competitive spirit at their core, it means A. They compete against spirits. B. They love to compete and win. The correct answer is B. They love to compete and win. 2. How did Rhonda treat her classmates? A. She turned them into minnows for her to eat. B. She was kind and friendly to them directly. The correct answer is B. She was kind and friendly to them directly. 3. How well did Rhonda do in university? A. She graduated at the top of her class. B. She did well, but couldn't compete with the smartest there. The correct answer is B. She did well, but couldn't compete with the smartest there. 4. If a workout is intense, it means that A. It's very difficult. B. The rest periods during the workout are long. The correct answer is A. It's very difficult. 5. Which of the following exercises uses mostly the upper body? A. Bench press. B. Squat. The correct answer is A. Bench press. 6. How did Rhonda train for the powerlifting meet? A. She went all out and trained extremely hard. B. She barely squeaked by with a victory. The correct answer is A. She went all out and trained extremely hard. 7. What were Rhonda's aspirations after winning the competition? A. To compete in the Olympics and start a business. B. She had no aspirations after winning. The correct answer is B. She had no aspirations after winning. 8. Why was Rhonda depressed? A. A dark and self-destructive force took over the world. B. She had strong feelings of emptiness and despair. The correct answer is B. She had strong feelings of emptiness and despair. 9. According to the story, which of the following is infinite? A. Human beings' ability to care. B. Human beings' ability to imagine and achieve things. The correct answer is B. Human beings' ability to imagine and achieve things. 10. Why was Rhonda so competitive in the first place? A. She was destined to be an all-star student and athlete. B. The story does not say. The correct answer is B. The story does not say. Chapter 6. Magic and Might. A goblin cried out in fear, but it was no use. With a quick swing of a long sword, its head was immediately removed from its body. The owner of the sword was Draylor, who was on the hunt for great treasures. Draylor was not the greatest at combat, but he did have many valuable skills. For one, he had a keen eye. He could see hidden enemies and objects better than almost anyone else. With Draylor at your side, you're never surprised by ambushes or dangerous traps. For this reason, he had been chosen to accompany 2 other treasure hunters through the goblin lair. "Just a little farther up ahead, and we'll reach it," spoke Jorgen. He raised his battle axe to check it. Dripping from the axe's blade was goblin blood, and that he could not accept. He considered himself a strong warrior, but not a barbarian. Only a barbarian would allow blood to stain his own nice clothes. He took out a cloth to clean his blade before continuing on. The group continued down the cave and reached a ravine that was over 10 meters wide. The bridge to cross the ravine had been cut from the other side. It was now dangling beneath their feet. Doom awaited anyone unlucky enough to fall in. Looking up, the group could see a blinding light through a crack in the ceiling of the cave. The 3 had not seen any daylight since starting their mission early in the morning. Draylor and Jorgen started coming up with ideas on how to cross the massive gap. But then, the 3rd member of the party stepped forward. A long, tattered cloak covered the face and body, but the hands could be seen moving in circles. Mysterious runes covered the hands with all sorts of ancient writing. Words in an unknown language came from the cloaked traveler. The runes began to glow bright blue. The chant was not more than a few seconds long, and at the end, the circling, glowing hands quickly shot up. Moments later, bright particles of light seemed to appear in the air. They began drawing closer together over the ravine, and then they started forming into a large structure. Now the shape of an arch could be seen. It was a bridge, one with beautiful prismatic colors. It was also semi-transparent, but when the cloaked figure stepped upon it, the other 2 knew it was safe to cross. Turning towards the other 2 companions, the face of a young woman could be seen through the hood. Alyssa was her name. "The spell won't last for more than a minute. Off we go now," she spoke with an eloquent voice. The 3 walked quickly across and had safely managed to reach the other side. They were surely coming to an end of the cavern. But what exactly lay in store for them? Would it be the stolen stash of goods as rumored? If so, what would be guarding it? Up ahead, the party approached a crude staircase made of stone. After climbing it, they finally found the answers to their burning questions. A large room opened up before them, and all was revealed. There in the far left corner was the stash of stolen merchant goods. Returning them would result in a great reward. Selling them and pocketing the money would make anyone as rich as a merchant. But there were also orcs, 3 to be exact, and they were not in the mood to share their ill-gotten gains. Vicious grunts filled the room moments after the party entered. Now, there was only one way to resolve this situation. Jorgen rushed in with his battle axe, wasting no time talking. The orcs blocked his attack with their scimitars. They then took turns striking back. Alyssa took aim with her staff and fired ice magic at the green creatures. Draylor, however, was nowhere to be seen. Facing 3 scimitars from 3 savage orcs would scare away most fighters. Even Jorgen showed signs of fear in his eyes as he heard the whooshing sounds of blades barely missing his ears. He could no longer attack as he was busy blocking, dodging, and trying not to be cleaved in 2. A lucky swing from below managed to get through and made a gash down his leg. A cry of pain followed, and the orcs grinned in response. The green brutes approached to finish the job, when a spear of ice flew between the shoulders of two of them. It barely missed due to Alyssa's unfortunate aiming, but it was enough to stop them in their tracks. Now the monsters were torn between which adventurer to attack. When the orcs turned their heads to communicate, there was a shock. They discovered that they were down to just two. One was lying on the floor in a pool of its own blood, fatally wounded. It appeared that whoever killed their orc comrade had disappeared back into the shadows. It might have even been a ghost for all they knew. While the two remaining orcs stood around confused, Jorgen took the opportunity to strike back. He was able to catch one off guard and slash its arm holding the scimitar. The extreme pain sent the orc into a rage. The orc gripped his weapon even harder and swung wildly at the warrior in every direction. The rage had made him extremely dangerous, but after each swing, he was also extremely vulnerable. With a well-timed ice spear from Alyssa, he was frozen solid in a block of ice. The final orc gave a look of defeat when he knew he could no longer win. He ran deeper into the cave away from the path the adventurers had come from. Just before he was out of sight, a knife thrown from a dark corner landed right in the back of his head, bringing the fight to an end. Draelor stepped out from the shadows, putting his long sword back into its sheath. "You make a great meat shield, Jorgen. I call first dibs on the loot, though. I did get most of the kills." "Oh, come on. This was a team effort, and you know it. You can't just go around getting the best loot because you got a few lucky kills," said Jorgen. "Sure I can. My character runs towards the gold and picks up as much as he can carry," said Draelor. "That's a load of crap, and you know it," said Alyssa, although now with the voice of a man. "If you keep playing like this, don't even bother coming back next week." "All right, fine," replied the player playing Draelor. He picked up his dice. "I'll roll a sleight of hand," he said, with a calm voice while throwing the dice. "I got 15. Now roll for a spot skill check." "You know what?" the player playing Jorgen said with anger while standing up. "I'm done. I'm taking my dice and going home," he shouted. And with that, the game had come to an end. Magic and Might. Comprehension questions. 1. In the party, who could see hidden enemies and traps the best? A. Draelor. B. Jorgen. The correct answer is A. Draelor. 2. If you fell into a very large ravine, what would likely happen? A. You would fall to your death. B. You would find treasure. The correct answer is A. You would fall to your death. 3. How did the party cross the ravine? A. They crossed a bridge that was dangling below. B. Alyssa cast a spell that formed a bridge to cross. The correct answer is B. Alyssa cast a spell that formed a bridge to cross. 4. What was the rumor that was mentioned in the story? A. There was a stash of stolen merchant goods in a cavern. B. There were goblins and orcs guarding a cavern. The correct answer is A. There was a stash of stolen merchant goods in a cavern. 5. What did the adventurers find at the end of the cavern? A. A stash of stolen goods and gold and 3 orcs. B. A knife in the back of an orc's head. The correct answer is A. A stash of stolen goods and gold and 3 orcs. 6. How was Jorgen injured during the fight? A. His leg was cut deeply. B. His body was stabbed. The correct answer is A. His leg was cut deeply. 7. What kind of magic did Alyssa fight with? A. She took aim with her staff and threw it like a spear. B. She cast spears made of ice to freeze enemies. The correct answer is B. She cast spears made of ice to freeze enemies. 8. How did the first orc die? A. It was killed by a ghost. B. It was killed by Draelor. The correct answer is B. It was killed by Draelor. 9. How did the last orc die? A. It was killed by a knife landing in the back of its head. B. It was killed by Alyssa. The correct answer is A. It was killed by a knife landing in the back of its head. 10. What was Draelor trying to do with his sleight of hand? A. He was trying to steal the treasure. B. He was trying to steal from his teammates' wallets. The correct answer is A. He was trying to steal the treasure. Chapter 7. Mind Games. When most people play games, it's as a casual hobby. They play to relax and seek entertainment after a long day or week of school or work. These sessions typically last from just a few minutes to several hours. They play many different games, and at the end of the day, they are just games. Calvin was not your typical gamer, however. To him, the future was gaming. There was a growing competitive scene for video games, and the prize pools were getting larger every year. He grew up hearing stories of teenagers and young adults walking away with thousands of dollars from tournaments. Why such huge prizes for beating someone in a video game? Any kind of game can become competitive, but not every game is fun to watch. When played at the pro level, certain games become amazing spectator sports, just like soccer or football. They attract millions of people across the world. Millions of people watching means companies will pay millions of dollars to advertise to them. Thus, a billion-dollar industry was born. The cash prizes, the glory, and the adventure were all too tempting to Calvin. To make it big was his dream. But there was a catch. You had to be the best, and the competition was filled with hardcore players whose whole lives revolved around not just gaming, but usually one game. Calvin just had to find his one game. Calvin neither had the quick reflexes required for shooting or fighting games, nor did he have the right team for team-based games. But he was naturally drawn towards strategy games. He found them easy to learn how to play, and he was obsessed with learning new techniques and strategies from players ranked higher than himself. Hours would fly by as he tested new ideas against online opponents. Each victory was proof that his time in and out of the game was paying off. It was highly rewarding, and it brought him a thrill he did not get anywhere else. At school, he was brilliant but lazy. Learning from teachers and books came somewhat easy, but it didn't excite him all too much. Storing large amounts of information in his head was kind of like a game, although a boring one. It helped a little to think of homework as practice games where he honed his abilities. Tests were then the high-level games that determined your true skill. All of this worked well enough to make him a B student. Calvin's friends at his high school were also gamers. At lunchtime and between classes, they would get excited discussing the latest and upcoming games. The group argued about what made games great and other games not so great. Conversations between them were full of mutual feelings of passion and love for video games. Every week, the group picked one specific game to play together on Saturday. They would take turns meeting at each other's houses. There they spent all day and night bonding together while enjoying their pastime. One week, Calvin and his friends decided to play a strategy game called TechCraft. The goal of the game was simple. Players duel other players by crafting weapons using the resources they find and fight over across the game field. The more resources you acquire, the higher tech and more effective weapons you can make. Players start with primitive tools and weapons, but can upgrade them. With enough resources, they can start crafting medieval tools and weapons and eventually modern ones. The strategy of the game is found in gathering more resources than your opponent and in picking fights you can win over contested areas on the map. Collect enough resources and you will overpower your enemy and win the game. For that week, and even the following week, the group was absolutely mesmerized by the game. They couldn't put it down. Matches would become very competitive, and the room would gradually get more tense by the minute. Whether you were playing or just spectating, the game could hold every last bit of your attention until everything was all over. After a few weeks of play, however, Calvin had learned several tips and tricks by watching more advanced players online. Soon enough, he was crushing his friends in embarrassing landslide victories. In fact, he became so good at the game that he never lost a single game to his friends ever again. As a result, everybody but Calvin started to lose interest in the game. He offered to teach them pro-level strategies, but it was too late. They had moved on. The group continued to rotate game after game, but Calvin's passion for TechCraft only kept growing. It was the only game he wanted to play. He played for hours each day, honing his skills against players at his level and higher. He went to bed every night thinking about the game, even dreaming about one day competing with the top-level players. There was something about grinding his way to the top that excited him deeply. Afternoons home from school were dedicated to practicing new strategies. Weekends were for reading up on new tips and tricks and to watch tournaments streamed live. And of course, nights were long due to extended play sessions with new friends he met through the online community. His obsession slowly started to take a toll on his life in the real world. In school, he tried to get a passing grade by doing the least amount of work, but this strategy quickly fell apart. His homework assignments were turned in late or even incomplete. He began to fall asleep in class due to lack of sleep, and as a result, his test scores started to drop. Calvin was also losing touch with his friends. Every last free moment he had went into one game, so there was no time to hang out after school or on weekends. His friends thought he was taking the game much too seriously, and they stopped inviting him to their meetups. The isolation, however, let him know who his real friends were. Calvin started to gain fame and status online as a highly skilled player. Here he had a community of people to bond over a game that not even the nerdy gamers at his school cared enough about. The internet had both isolated him from real-life friends and given him new friends that shared a very niche hobby they all loved. He talked with thousands of players across the world in chat rooms and forums. They watched his games and clips from them across social media, and many were impressed by what they saw. Calvin's mind was an encyclopedia on how to master the game. He could remember and apply almost everything he learned watching and reading. By mixing and matching strategies used by different professional players, he was able to create his own unique and effective playstyle. His victories in online tournaments were enough to earn him a spot at an invitational event. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The best players of the game gathered online for a chance at the grand prize of $50,000. Only one person would walk away with the prize money, and it was going to be the top player of all the top players. There were several from the community cheering Calvin on, but the voices cheering for the most famous players were nearly 100 times louder. Suddenly, it seemed like most of his supporters had abandoned him. This shook his confidence significantly, but the idea that he was going in as the underdog helped calm him down. Despite being a nervous wreck, Calvin did surprisingly well the first round. He was able to put his full attention and focus on continuously spying on his opponent and preparing his ambush. His opponent suffered big losses after a surprise attack by Calvin. As a result, his opponent played extremely conservatively while being afraid to take any risks. This allowed Calvin to control the playing field easily, gather more resources, and build a much stronger character to win the game in the end. With his first major tournament match victory, his confidence was at an all-time high. Now more messages of support from his fans started to appear on social media. His momentum was building. The next rounds were by no means easy, however. They were much closer than the first match. But as the games progressed, he learned that he could handle the pressure better than most players. In fact, he thrived on it. The more pressure, the better, he thought. All players make mistakes and are affected by them, but Calvin's mistakes didn't upset him all that much. Before he knew it, Calvin had arrived at the semi-final round. Even he was amazed he had made it this far in his first major tournament. All his hard work had paid off. The next match, however, would be a true test of his abilities. It would be against Jonathan, the player ranked number 1 in the world. So much adrenaline was running through his head that he could not process the situation whatsoever. So instead, he pulled out his smartphone to check the messages he received. He could barely focus, but managed to read the first 50 or so. There was an overwhelming support for him from an unimaginable number of people. But there was one message that immediately stood out from the rest. It read, "Try not to kill yourself after you get humiliated today. Good luck." Those 12 words sent Calvin into a rage. All he could think about was typing out the nastiest reply he could come up with. He stood up and paced around the room while thinking of the perfect comeback. 10 minutes had gone by, then 20 had passed. But before he could type out his insult, it was time for the semi-final match. He wanted to slam his keyboard on something, but he needed it to play. The match had begun. Calvin needed to put pressure on Jonathan to gain an advantage. He spied on his every move, waiting for his opportunity to strike. When he did, it would be game over from that point. He just needed to be patient. Wait for it, he kept telling himself. Be ready. It's coming. But Jonathan simply did not make any mistakes of any kind. It was Calvin who was making all the mistakes. Every move Calvin made was expected and countered by the champion. He had never played against someone who played so flawlessly and beautifully. There was no advantage he could secure, and it was all over after just 15 minutes. The match was a complete blowout. After the game, Calvin put his hands on his head in disbelief. How on earth could he ever compete with that? There was no way. How was it even possible to play that fast? He had watched videos of Jonathan's games, but to play against him was an absolute nightmare. That night, Calvin lay in his bed, reflecting on the journey that had led him to this point. He reached for his smartphone to read others' opinions about the game, but then remembered the awful message he came across earlier. There were hundreds of encouraging messages he had received, most of which were nice and wonderful to read. But that one message had ruined them all. What good was reading posts from fans if one bad one could infuriate him? Who would send such a message? Was it from one of Jonathan's fans? Why did he care so much about it? How could reading a post from a stranger upset him so much? He was suffering from depression, but aren't most people suffering as well, he thought. Sadness filled his heart. Tears started forming at the corner of his eyes, and now he felt more alone than ever before. Streams of tears flowed from his eyes as he wished he was gone from this world. Calvin awoke the next morning and went for a long walk around his neighborhood. He thought about where to go from here with his life. He had invested more than 1,000 hours into this game and had made it to the semifinals of a major tournament. He was proud of his achievement without a doubt. What had it cost him, though? His grades dropped to D's in most of his classes, and he was even failing a few classes. He had made no time for his friends, so they stopped inviting him to hang out together. And his belly had gained at least 15 pounds due to a lack of exercise and him living off of junk food. What would it cost to beat Jonathan? It would not take 1,000 hours, but multiple thousands of hours of practice to win. He would have to sacrifice everything to even have a chance at defeating a champion. For the first time in a long time, Calvin felt how easily he could ruin his life with such a decision. He saw his life as one large strategy game. Strategy at its core comes down to risk assessment, he figured. All moves in a game involve risk. Winning was done not by taking big risks for big rewards. It was done by taking the smallest risks for the largest rewards. And so it was time for a break. It was time to reconnect with old friends and his schoolwork. It was time to bring balance back into his life. Life was waiting for him. Life always waits to welcome us back. Mind games. Comprehension questions. 1. What makes a game a spectator sport? A. The many people watching it. B. The many players competing in it. The correct answer is A. The many people watching it. 2. Why was Calvin drawn towards strategy games? A. He didn't have the right team to compete with. B. He loved learning and testing new strategies against people. The correct answer is B. He loved learning and testing new strategies against people. 3. What did Calvin's group of friends do every Saturday? A. They got together to play games. B. They picked one specific game and took turns playing it. The correct answer is A. They got together to play games. 4. What is a landslide victory? A. A victory after a very close game. B. A victory where one side completely destroys the other. The correct answer is B. A victory where one side completely destroys the other. 5. Why did Calvin's grades start to drop? A. He stayed up all night cramming for tests. B. He tried to do the least amount of work possible. The correct answer is B. He tried to do the least amount of work possible. 6. How did Calvin create his own playstyle? A. He was a super smart and gifted person. B. He mixed and matched strategies from top-level players. The correct answer is B. He mixed and matched strategies from top-level players. 7. Why did Calvin feel abandoned in the story? A. His parents didn't spend much time with him. B. Many of his supporters were cheering for other players. The correct answer is B. Many of his supporters were cheering for other players. 8. How did Calvin handle pressure during top-level games? A. He made mistakes like all players. B. He actually enjoyed it. The correct answer is B. He actually enjoyed it. 9. If you slam a computer keyboard on something, A. It will restart the computer. B. It will break. The correct answer is B. It will break. 10. Which of the following is the best strategy for winning? A. High-risk moves with potentially low rewards. B. Low-risk moves with potentially high rewards. The correct answer is B. Low-risk moves with potentially high rewards. Chapter 8. Moderation and Extremism. Sarah was young, beautiful, and single, but that did little to alleviate her problems. Having been raised by parents with deep issues of unhappiness, her childhood was full of intense emotional pain. Her mother was quite abusive and had her own history of mistreatment from her parents. She was on permanent disability due to a back injury she suffered many years ago. Having never to work again left her with nothing but leisure time on her hands. She spent her days watching TV, binge drinking, and starting arguments with Sarah and her little brothers at every opportunity. Sarah quickly learned to avoid confrontations with her mother at all costs, especially when she was drinking. Her father did the best he could to provide for the family. He had a stable job, was able to afford a safe place for everyone to live, and put food on the table. He would always come home at night exhausted and stressed out, and Sarah's mom regularly took advantage of this. She picked fights with him about the most trivial things and insulted him to no end. Eventually he would snap, and intense shouting matches would occur, sometimes turning violent. One morning, shortly after Sarah turned 11, her father left to get his morning coffee, but he never came back. Just like that, he was gone for good. And now there was nothing between Sarah and her brothers and their mother. If she avoided her mother, it meant the younger ones would become the targets. She would not let that happen. Because of her troubled home life, Sarah struggled frequently at school. She had learned to avoid confrontation as a child, so she never bothered to raise her hand to ask or answer questions. If she never tried, she would never fail, she figured. Being temporarily free from her mother was good enough anyway. And she had plenty of friends who were much nicer to her. They helped her with her schoolwork and encouraged her during class. Outside of class, her circle of friends was always cracking jokes, making it easier to laugh even on the toughest of days. Some of the girls were even ambitious and would talk about wanting to go to college to become doctors and lawyers. Life in general seemed much brighter and hopeful being around them. Sarah's mom, however, became increasingly harder and harder to deal with. Alcohol had become a bit boring for her, so she turned to opioids to cope with reality. Fortunately, she was very passive after each dose and didn't cause any trouble around the house. But when she ran out of her prescription, the withdrawal symptoms made her both angry and violent. Sarah took the full force of the damage, as she couldn't bear the thought of her brothers suffering instead. While she protected her brothers from danger, they saw and heard much of what happened. Their mother had a few close calls after overdosing on opioids. Sarah was told by her mum to not call 911, because if she did, the police would take her and her brothers away from their home forever. When she turned 18, she came to the decision to move out for good. If she was going to do anything with her life, she needed the space and freedom to start. Her brothers were now old enough to take care of themselves and their mother when necessary. To pay the rent for her new apartment, she took a job as a barista at a local coffee shop. Sarah worked hard and gave the job everything she had. After all, she had nobody to turn to if she couldn't pay the bills. She was quickly promoted to a manager position after just a year. There was one job at the shop she could not do, however. The store was located in a downtown area where many immigrants worked as manual laborers. These immigrants were largely from Spanish-speaking countries and spoke almost no English at all. They were able to order what they wanted but couldn't understand anything the staff spoke to them. As a barista, it was Sarah's job to make each customer feel comfortable and at home. But she couldn't do that in English, and so the inspiration to learn Spanish took root. In her free time, she used language learning apps and listened to audio lessons for several hours each week. Sarah was making fast progress and was amazed at how easy it was to pick up simple phrases and vocabulary. Almost immediately, she started using what she learned with her customers at work. Her Spanish was met with surprised faces and joy. Although when her customers spoke back to her in Spanish, she was now the one who couldn't understand. Many conversations repeated this same pattern, and after a while it became clear. While she knew many phrases and words, she couldn't have a real conversation in Spanish. She poured more and more time into learning as much Spanish as she could. She bought grammar books. She memorized vocabulary lists. She watched TV in Spanish while she was at home. She even got into the habit of making flashcards on her smartphone and reviewing them for a few minutes every day. Yet her rate of progress was slow and thus disappointing. Sarah would forget words, and there were hundreds of things she didn't know how to say to her customers. And she still had little idea of what customers were saying back to her. As a C student, she concluded she wasn't smart enough to become fluent. One day, she was catching up with her friend Leah from school, whom she hadn't heard from in a long time. Leah was now a sophomore in college and planning to get her degree in chemistry. She mentioned that she was also taking French classes on the side, which immediately caught Sarah's attention. They had a similar hobby they could bond over. So Leah suggested they both go to a local language exchange event held at a coffee shop downtown. The event took place on a Sunday afternoon. By the time Sarah and Leah arrived, there were nearly 100 people sitting down and chatting with one another. The girls heard a variety of languages including Spanish, French, German, Italian, and even Korean. After signing up at the door, they split up to join the language groups they were interested in. Sarah found not just one, but multiple native Spanish speakers to converse with. In each conversation, she picked up new words and wrote them down in a notebook she brought along. Communication was extremely slow, but she felt she was taking the necessary steps towards real progress. One gentleman she spoke to was Gabriel. He was from Spain and had come to the language exchange to practice speaking English. After a few minutes of small talk and chatter, they learned they both had a similar past. He ran away from home at age 16 and took up various labouring jobs to support himself. From there, he decided to travel around Europe, migrating to France and then Germany in search of new experiences. While travelling and working across Europe, he taught himself both French and German. After the event officially came to an end, Sarah found Leah and Gabriel chatting outside in French. She was speechless after hearing how beautifully and fluently he spoke. How could someone who had dropped out of high school learn so many different foreign languages? What was he doing differently than her? She decided to approach him and ask him directly. Gabriel said that while moving to the target country certainly helped, it was not the deciding factor. He knew plenty of immigrant workers in France and Germany who could only speak their native language. According to him, what mattered most was what you did in your free time. Gabriel spent the overwhelming majority of his time not studying but listening to and reading anything and everything he could in French, German, and English. Occasionally he would go out with friends and socialize, but the vast majority of his time was spent immersing himself in different cultures. It was the only way he could understand all the different words and phrases native speakers used. While on the train heading home, Sarah and Leah discussed what Gabriel had told them. They both agreed that his language skills were nothing short of impressive. Leah didn't quite agree with Gabriel, however. As a college student working part-time, there was just no way she could dedicate that much time each day to learning. Besides, he learned all of those languages out of necessity, and she was learning French mostly as a hobby. Maybe she would reach fluency one day, but if it never happens, she would be okay with that. She had nothing to prove. Sarah, on the other hand, reflected deeply on his words. She desperately wanted to speak fluently like Gabriel, but for just one foreign language. The idea excited her more than anything else had in her life. There was a passion burning within her that she could not explain. Maybe it was her ego. Maybe it was because of her difficult past. If he could do it, so could she figured. She wasn't sure exactly where to start immersing, but she knew that the time to start was now. Moderation and extremism. Comprehension questions. 1. What kind of family was Sarah born into? A. One filled with abuse and violence. B. One filled with moderation and extremism. The correct answer is A. One filled with abuse and violence. 2. What kind of relationship did Sarah have with her brothers? A. She abused them to make herself feel better. B. She protected them from their mother. The correct answer is B. She protected them from their mother. 3. Sarah's friends at school did many things for her but did not A. Encourage her during class. B. Inspire her to go to college to become a doctor or lawyer. The correct answer is B. Inspire her to go to college to become a doctor or lawyer. 4. Who would Sarah go to if she couldn't pay her bills? A. She had nobody to go to. B. She had her friend Leah who would take care of her. The correct answer is A. She had nobody to go to. 5. What kind of work does a barista do? A. They serve drinks for customers at a bar. B. They make drinks for customers at a coffee shop. The correct answer is B. They make drinks for customers at a coffee shop. 6. How did Sarah get started learning Spanish? A. She had her customers at the coffee shop teach her Spanish. B. She used apps and listened to audio lessons. The correct answer is B. She used apps and listened to audio lessons. 7. What happened when Sarah spoke Spanish to her customers? A. She was full of surprise and joy. B. They were pleased and spoke back in Spanish. The correct answer is B. They were pleased and spoke back in Spanish. 8. What do you typically do at a language exchange? A. You and a partner practice speaking in foreign languages. B. You practice languages in a classroom setting. The correct answer is A. You and a partner practice speaking in foreign languages. 9. How did Gabriel get so good at so many languages? A. He traveled to multiple countries. B. He spent all his free time reading and listening to languages. The correct answer is B. He spent all his free time reading and listening to languages. 10. Which of the following best describes language immersion? A. A way to learn a language in moderation. B. An extremely dedicated lifestyle to learn a language. The correct answer is B. An extremely dedicated lifestyle to learn a language.